Welcome to Why You're Reading, the podcast that unpacks the hype behind everything from BookTok obsessions to Booker Prize winners. Hi, Ellie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I've still got my cold from last week, but I'm hanging in there.
The plague's going around.
Plague is going around. I think last week I sounded like Roz from Monsters Inc. and this week I sound like Stevie Nicks. So very on theme.
How on brand? Because today we are talking about Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid.
Daisy Jones and the Six is a brilliant book by Taylor Jenkins Reid that both of us have read multiple times before we've actually done this podcast. So for anyone that doesn't know what Daisy Jones and the Six is about, I'm going to read the blurb so you kind of get a sense of what's happening in the story. But everybody knows Daisy Jones and the Six. Their sound defined an era. Their albums were on every turntable. They sold out arenas from coast to coast. Then, on the 12th of July, 1979, Daisy Jones walked barefoot onto the stage at Chicago Stadium, and it all came crashing down. Everyone was there. Everyone remembers it differently. No one knew why they split until now. So yeah.
Dot, dot, dot.
Dot, dot, dot. Dramatic.
It is very dramatic. It's an oral history, kind of like a music documentary put to paper of a fictional rock band in the 70s, kind of akin to like Fleetwood Mac. It is split into like these kind of interviews. So instead of a classic narration, we have these like a series of excerpts from like all the members of the band and the people around them. So you kind of have to like piece the story together a little bit. But Daisy Jones is this like like heartthrob, kind of wild child, very talented but like unconventional woman who has her ups and downs, quite literally with a lot of pills. She is a drug addict in the true spirit of rock and roll. They're hitting the drugs hard in this book. Then there's also like a will they won't they romance with the kind of lead singer of the Six. Who's married and has kids. Yeah, there's all this drama around the tensions in the band, the like power dynamics of the band. The main singer, Billy, very much takes the reins over songwriting, over arranging, over everything. And then it's like all the tensions around that. And then Daisy Jones comes in and she's very headstrong and they butt heads, but they also fall in love?
Yeah. It's kind of a simplistic story, but also quite complicated just because it feels very human. I feel like there's a lot of different personalities and a lot of people kind of fighting those personalities when actual fact they kind of make magic when they're together. It's very musical, very ethereal somehow. Daisy as a character is kind of fascinating. She's a muse for so many men in particular. She's kind of seen as this beautiful, ethereal, pixie wild girl that everyone loves to be around and loves to be with. But she's also very, very intelligent and beautiful and knows it too. So I kind of loved her. She's slightly arrogant, but in a confident way. So maybe it's confidence, not arrogance, I should say. But she's a really fascinating character. And then you have the Six, the band, like you say, with Billy Dunn. And Billy's this not so confident character, maybe, but loves his wife, loves his kids, loves the drugs and drinks, and then has to stop.
It's interesting because from his perspective, he's just like, oh, I'm just doing what's best for the band. And then the people who like him are like, yeah, no, we trusted Billy. And then the people who didn't like him were like, oh, he was so arrogant and he was always taking control. He was always like stomping over people, blah, blah, blah. I feel like the book kind of makes you work to form your own opinion about these characters and kind of like choose who to trust and what information is true or what is kind of tainted by emotion and failures of memory and stuff as well. But the muse thing I thought was really interesting because with muses in art history, you know, you're typically women and it's always presumed that they're these very like passive figures, you know, just like lying on a chaise lounge where like a painter, you know, draws and paints them or whatever. They're just like a beautiful thing to look at. Whereas I feel like Daisy Jones really kind of emphasizes the the contributions of muses.
There's a line that I always really like whenever I hear it because I always listen to the audiobook, but I have an original proof copy from the UK. This is probably worth some money. But there was a great quote that she's talking about an up and down where she's drinking champagne, but she also has pills because the pills bring her up, but the champagne brings her down, or vice versa. So it's kind of she calls it an up and down for that reason. So she's not getting too high, but she's also not getting too mellow at the same time. And she's talking about it in front of a man who's a director. And he says to her, I'm going to use that in something one day. And he wrote it down on a napkin and put it in his back pocket. I thought to myself, what the hell makes you think I'm not going to use it in something someday? But of course, there it was in his next movie. That's how it was back then. I was just supposed to be the inspiration for some man's great idea. Well, fuck that. That's why I started writing my own stuff. And I was like, yes, girl. Absolutely. Love that. I love that energy. I love that scene in general because it really summarised Daisy Jones as a character to me instantly. She is a muse and she is intelligent, she is beautiful, all these wonderful things. but she's also her own woman and she owns that. And I think that's such a powerful, strong message for anybody, not even just women, but just everybody. Kind of own your stuff. Don't let people take it from you just because it's clever. Why wouldn't you use it one day? I think that's brilliant.
There was another quote where Billy says, Karen was just a great musician. That was all there was to it. I always say I don't care if you're a man, woman, white, black, gay, straight, or anything in between. If you play well, you play well. Music is a great equalizer that way. And Karen says, men often think they deserve a sticker for treating women like people. I was like, yeah.
She's a great character as well, Karen. I think the female characters in this really do stand out. The men slightly blur into one for me, particularly the kind of fringe men, so all the different agents and managers, because Daisy has all these relationships with different men and then she kind of joins the Six and Teddy's their manager. And so it's a lot of those in-between people that kind of do just blend out. But even to an extent, Graham, Warren, Billy, all the boys of the Six, because it's only Karen in the Six who's a woman until Daisy joins. But Camilla, Karen, Daisy, I think are the three strongest characters in this book. And actually, you know, spoiler alert for the ending, but I feel like at the end, Daisy basically says if it wasn't for Camilla, she wouldn't have survived. And if it wasn't
Camilla is Billy's wife.
Yeah, Camilla's Billy's wife. So the woman that Daisy basically is trying to replace, because Daisy's trying to always get with Billy, and vice versa, Billy's always trying to deny himself with Daisy, because he does love Camilla, but he also loves Daisy for other reasons. Daisy's everything that he desires and everything that's dangerous, and Camilla's everything that's safe and happy and joyful. So it's kind of a split. And he kind of, I think he does the right thing. He doesn't sleep with Daisy initially. I don't think he actually ever sleeps with Daisy. He ends up kissing her. He does fall off the wagon. He does kiss her. But actually it's Daisy that basically says to him, no, go back to your wife. She's amazing. It's also because of Camilla that Daisy gets clean and has a life of her own and survives the 70s. So the relationship between the women is just as important as the relationship between the women and the men. But also the women characters just felt more fleshed out to me in general.
Yeah, and I thought what was interesting with Camilla as well, she's the wife at home, like minding the kids. And normally I think when we think of like these narratives of these rock stars around the road, like cheating and doing drugs and blah, 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 which does happen in the novel, we kind of think of the women as like victims and like very kind of passive agents, whereas Camilla, at one point, Billy comes home and is like, listen, like, I'll quit the band, we can get a nice house somewhere and like a truck and blah, blah. And she's like, if I wanted that, I wouldn't have married a rock star. This is the life that I want. I'm happy. I love you. It kind of shows that, you know, these people have their own agency. They're not just like these poor victims on the sidelines of history, which can be the case, but isn't always. Yeah. Camilla was just a great character and was very interesting. And as well, I think something that the book did as well was that Camilla and Daisy, even though they're both kind of going after, Camilla is with Billy and then Daisy's kind of going after Billy, it doesn't pit them against each other necessarily. No. It's not really like demonizing the women in like this kind of cat fight mentality either. And it doesn't villainize either one of them. It's not like, oh, Daisy is this whore who's like trying to steal a man or whatever. You know, we understand their motivations. We understand Billy's position in it. It's just great characters that aren't one-dimensional and flat. Like, but I do agree that like some of those kind of side characters, even like the guys in the band, are there to just add some extra information. And so them, I was like, I wasn't too sure on their personalities as much, but I didn't really mind. You know, it didn't detract from the novel. It
didn't. It kind of, they were there to kind of flesh out the characters of Billy and Daisy and Camilla. And it's true, they don't really villainize either of the women, which is really important and really rare as well. And the kind of the ending is surprising, but the whole layout and structure of this book was surprising to me because so much happens before we even get into kind of Daisy and Billy. Like Daisy and Billy don't meet until a good kind of 50, 40 pages into the story. But by that point, we know all of Daisy's backstory and how she got to kind of being a musician to being a muse, the trouble with her family. But also we have all of Billy and his brother and them starting the band and Billy falling off the wagon, or not even falling off the wagon, he wasn't on the wagon, but Billy going absolutely hard, getting drunk and drugged up and having affairs to the point that his wife, Camilla, has their daughter. He arrives at the hospital completely stoned and turns to his manager and says, I can't go in and meet my child until I'm clean. This is the wake-up call I needed. And so he doesn't see his kid. And that's a really big scene to happen so early in the story. It almost feels like there could have been two different books here. The kind of before the Six and after the Six and during the Six, but actually we got it all in one. So I thought the structure of it was really, really clever and made me invested in the characters before we even got to the kind of nitty-gritty Fleetwood Mac-esque drama of Daisy Jones and the Six.
What I like about this novel as well is that it takes place in the kind of glamorous world of sex, drugs, rock and roll, but it doesn't glamorize them. I think initially like plays on this notion of like, oh, this is a fictional band, and like you know this band, and everyone wants to find out the like secrets behind their breakup and everything. But then once you actually get into the story, it's quite heavy, and it doesn't shy away from the trouble with addiction and the impact that it has on yourself, on your family, on your friends, on your career, and like professional lives. I think collectively we have a tendency to very much like romanticize the past and, you know, look at things through rose-colored glasses and be like, oh, wouldn't it have been so fun to be a rock star and like going around the country and you know, smashing up hotel rooms and doing coke at 11 in the morning, whatever. And then you see, oh, like Daisy's waking up and she's coming in to the recording studio doped out of her mind at 11, and it's not very nice for anyone. And she's also not having a good time, and so it really kind of like pulls back that kind of veil of like glamour and glitz and everything.
The successes as well as the kind of the troubles, the loneliness, the difficulties, I suppose, particularly with Billy and his addiction, and the fact they have two separate buses, one for the party kind of druggies and everyone that's drinking, which is pretty much everyone except him, and then him on his own, missing his family, trying desperately not to drink, trying desperately not to kind of break the vows that he's given to his wife. And it's an interesting kind of take on it, I think, because we do have a tendency to kind of glamorize the 70s and 80s in particular. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the 70s and 80s. I grew up very much in this realm of music, Status Quo, Fleetwood Mac, Queen, all of it. I absolutely loved it. And I grew up in a place where, you know, Bob Geldof was a neighbour. I once had scrambled eggs next to Annie Lennox, and Bono was on my left at one point. It's a weird place to kind of grow up, but it's also a great place because I was surrounded by such great music and musicians, and we used to watch Live Aid concert on DVD as kids. For us, it was a really big part of our life. So I think that's partially why I really liked Daisy Jones and I really recognised this world, because I have my vinyl collection to my right. I can see it out of the corner of my eye. And I love this world. I love this music. And the TV show, the adaptation they did of Daisy Jones and the Six, which we'll definitely come on to, I think was a really good interpretation of the kind of behind the scenes, the music, that world. This had such links, this book in general, and the audio book in general had such links to kind of Fleetwood Mac for me, because I've watched so many documentaries about that band, which was full of drama, was similar in kind of the Six in terms of the wife swapping or the affairs, and also the drugs and the issues that caused the band and the relationships being strained because of drug use and drinking. Always come back to this audiobook. I probably listen to the audiobook at least once a year now. And it does feel a bit like a Netflix documentary in my head, but it's also a bit like putting on a Fleetwood Mac record.
It is like very heavily inspired by the story of Fleetwood Mac, and specifically Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and like their kind of relationship ups and downs. But I don't think you have to know that in order to enjoy this novel. I think maybe if you do, then you'll like pick up on more Easter eggs and everything.
Adds to a layer, I think. It just adds an extra layer. But actually, like you say, you don't have to know the dramas of the 70s rock bands and the lore of all of that world to enjoy this story. I think it's just it's a very good story.
I also wonder like how many people, because since this book is huge on BookTok and social media, you know, how many like teenagers and like young Gen Z kind of are picking up this book and maybe are introduced to Fleetwood Mac or like haven't known them before, which seems like a crazy thing to say. My like dad is a huge Fleetwood Mac fan, but so like I always knew who they were. Do you think on the off chance that there might be someone out there listening who doesn't know Fleetwood Mac or the drama surrounding Fleetwood Mac, do you want to maybe talk about like the parallels between that real life story and this novel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the drama of Fleetwood Mac is fairly endless, quite frankly. There's so much. It was a band that it had many iterations, many different kind of guitarists and bass players, drummers. People came, people went, which is very common of the kind of that period of time. And you see it in Daisy Jones as well. They had the I think it's the drummer who went off to Vietnam. And you also had kind of people that left, and I think in the TV show one of them leaves to become a dentist or something, which is which is what happens. You know, there was a lot of band swapping in that time, and to this day there's still a lot of band swapping. But I think Fleetwood Mac, it was started by, I can't actually remember their full names, which is terrible, but Fleetwood and Mac, which is why it's called Fleetwood Mac. And Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham were a singer and guitarist who were touring as a duo. They were a couple. Stevie Nicks has this beautiful, wonderful, raspy kind of vocal fry voice, and Lindsey Buckingham is one of the greatest guitar players, in my opinion, ever. And they brought them in to kind of do an album or do a song or something, and then they ended up staying. And the drama was intense. Like Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's relationship was fiery, to say the least. We've got some of the greatest songs ever because of their relationship. We've got Dreams, which is Stevie Nicks' ballad. Landslide, her brilliant breakup song, Go Your Own Way, which was Lindsay Buckingham's kind of FU to Stevie Nicks, to the point that I think Stevie Nicks used to leave the stage whenever he performed it, because even though she knows it's recognised it as being a great song, she was also recognised it as being the song he wrote to basically say up yours. I think she's stuck around in the later years. She used to come on with a tambourine.
There's also there's a live performance of Silver Springs. And I forget what year it was, but there is like, it contains the lyrics like, you'll never get away from the sound of the woman that loves you, and you just see Stevie Nicks like staring at Lindsay and just singing this, and it's like you can feel the tension on the stage, and it's fantastic.
But that's why it's so good. Even though they broke up several times, there was a lot of affairs, and a lot of it was drug fueled. They've all opened up to saying it was a lot of mistakes that were made, and it was brought on by the chemistry and the tension of the band, which is very similar to Daisy Jones and Six, where you have kind of Graham and Karen get together, even though they don't really fit on paper, but they ended up kind of getting together in the story, which is actually a really lovely little love story, but it ends in a slightly heartbreaking way.
And this book, I feel like, kind of gives you like the fantasy of like, oh, what if we knew what happened behind closed doors in Fleetwood Mac? Like, what if we actually knew the story? I feel like that's kind of what it's drawing from. And one of our producers, Eleanor, brought up the question like, oh, since it's based so heavily on Fleetwood Mac, like, is that kind of cheating? And what do you think?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that I've read a few articles from Taylor Jenkins Reid who said that it wasn't implicitly inspired by Fleetwood Mac. It was inspired by lots of other singer-songwriters. She mentioned Joni Mitchell. She mentioned Stevie Nicks as a separate entity as well. So she's been inspired by a lot. But it seems, as someone that's a massive fan of Fleetwood Mac and loves this book, it feels like Fleetwood Mac entirely to me. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I love it. But I think I can see the point of people saying, is it an original thought? It's an original idea. But why not base it on something like that and kind of build a brand new story around it? I think it's a very interesting, exciting topic. There's a reason we love Fleetwood Mac's music so much and why it touches us, and it feels so raw and real, and that kind of comes across in Daisy Jones. I think so long as it's done well, why not?
I agree. It doesn't feel like you're reading a novel where she just like Control F'd Stevie Nicks and like replaced it with Daisy Jones. You know what I mean?
The ChatGPT version.
Yeah, it feels like it doesn't feel like it was Fleetwood Mac fan fiction that was then like repurposed. It's solid enough to stand on its own two feet.
I think the stylized version, the kind of the payoff at the end as well of it's a documentary that's being done by Billy and Camilla's daughter, who was Julia, who was there during kind of the Daisy Jones and the Six heyday. And she really liked Daisy Jones. That payoff at the end when she's interviewing them all, despite the fact they haven't been together since 1979, they had this massive concert at the Chicago Stadium, and they broke up and no one ever figured out why. And it was because Billy decided to kind of go get clean and be with his family and to give up music and to take away all those distractions and issues that were basically coming up, and Daisy goes off and get clean. But it's such a really strong ending and very moving as well. In the TV show, I think they actually did it better than in the book. In the book, it was quite rushed to me, but in the TV show, it's very, very emotional.
Taylor Jenkins Reid seems to often center the themes of like fame and celebrity and media in her novels. She studied film and television, and then she worked as a casting agent in LA for a few years. So she has 4 books that are all kind of like period dramas / like historical fiction. Period dramas in that it's like 70s, 80s, 90s, not like
hurts my soul. That's period drama now, Jesus.
But The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is in like all old Hollywood and centers an old Hollywood star, and is structured around a biographer who goes to tell her story. And so there's that kind of interplay of like an interview and an interviewee. And then Daisy Jones obviously is like written as an oral tradition. It's a 70s band. Malibu Rising is about like 2 generations of this like prominent South Carolina family, and it's set in 1983. And then Carrie Soto is set in the 90s, and it's about a famous tennis star. And I haven't read the Malibu Rising or Carrie Soto, but I know from like researching that Carrie Soto includes kind of like TV transcripts and newspaper clips. So I think it's really interesting how Taylor Jenkins Reid weaves in the relationship between like fame and media in like her different novels, and like does it differently each time. It's all of this interplay between the like celebrity as like the star, and then the celebrity as like the person behind it. Kind of a lot of them are kind of written retrospectively as well, so there's a lot of reflection on, you know, how these people presented themselves, how, you know, the public and how, you know, their managers, whoever, kind of expected them to be, and then how they felt, and then kind of the damage or like the tension between those like different selves.
There's that question as well about who's kind of telling the truth and what's the 2D version versus the 3D version, and seeing the different sides to every story and the different opinions of different people in your lives. Because I could describe you in one way, our producers could describe you in another, and always positive. I think that's the interesting take with Daisy Jones and also with Evelyn Hugo, is being able to see kind of one person say, oh, this person's like this, but actually to hear from them, this is what happened, or this is what this person's like. So it's a really interesting way to flesh out the characters, but also have those unreliable narrators in there as well.
I'm excited to read her other books to like see how they all weave together, because I know from online that there's like a Taylor Jenkins Reid universe where there's like Easter eggs in each, and it kind of reminds me of like Taylor Swift and her fans, of people like finding Easter eggs of like allusions of a song, you know, 4 years before it was actually released, and you know, like alluding to this character, blah 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 blah. You know, have you read all the books actually, or what have you read?
I haven't. No, I've read Evelyn Hugo and I've read Daisy Jones, and I started reading Malibu Rising, but I put it down and I haven't picked it back up again. But it isn't one that I DNF'd. I don't DNF books. It was just a case of I wasn't in the right headspace.
I did not finish it. I did
not finish it. I just want to
I put it down for a little bit.
Exactly. No, it's a case of I wanted to take it on holiday with me, and I was reading it in winter, so I was like, I'm going to put this down and take it on holiday with me. So that's what I intend on doing. I love it when the characters kind of pop up, because in Daisy Jones, Mick Reaver is the character in Malibu Rising who pops up in Daisy Jones. And so we kind of see him as a younger, more successful man. And then in Malibu Rising, it's that kind of later life, and we're looking at his family, his children, the impact there. And then Carrie Soto pops up fairly early doors in Malibu Rising. It's a bit like catching up with old friends somehow. And I just like that kind of connectivity.
Yeah. I feel like it lends itself quite well to social media and like BookTok as well, because then I wonder if people have conversations of like, oh, you know, there's this side character in Daisy Jones, or this one in Evelyn Hugo, like I wonder if that's going to be the new main character in the next one, or if like they're going to pop up again. But an interesting thing that I found in reading interviews of Taylor Jenkins Reid was that she was talking about that kind of play between the like celebrity self and the self, and she said, now with Instagram and Facebook, that's what everyone's doing. We're all putting forth a story about our lives that is not exactly our life. What I'm interested in is the difference between the truth and the myth. So I think in like the social media age now, you know, we all curate our Instagram selves, or our like TikTok selves, or our YouTube selves, or our podcast selves. It's interesting now that we can all relate to those like aspects of celebrity, even though it's a much smaller scale, you know, of like that kind of putting images up and like curating this self online for people that you might only have met once, you might never have met ever. And it's really interesting because like the amount of people that we now have, like we now all have an audience, like no matter how big or small, when engaging in social media. And I think that might be part of the reason as well, even just like kind of subconsciously, of why her meditations on fame and celebrity are kind of striking chords with people, and you know, the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell other people.
It's a good point. It's something I try not to think about it too deeply. I spend too much time on social media. So did you listen to this, or did you read the ebook or the paperback edition of Daisy Jones?
I kind of bounced between the audiobook and the ebook, which is what I did the last time, I think, as well. I think last time I might have started reading the ebook, and then I was like curious about the audiobook, and I listened, and I realized that it was this like full cast recording, and I think the like voice acting does a great job of like fleshing out these characters, and it really feels like you're listening to this podcast documentary rather than reading a book. Did you do the same?
I did. I was always in with the audiobook. I've only ever listened to the audiobook. So I do have, like I said, I've got a proof copy, which is really rare. But I tried to read it in paperback, I think the second time, so when I was rereading it. And I didn't enjoy it because it felt weird. You didn't have the nuances of the comedic responses to kind of a bit like with the Six and naming the Six and where they got that name from. When you have it just kind of one person saying it was named the Six because it sounded like the Sex. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. No, it wasn't. Yes, it was. On the page, that just kind of goes straight over your head. You're not hearing the voices. You're hearing you basically saying it in your head. But in an audiobook with a full cast, which is unique, there's not many audiobooks that do full cast or multicast productions. It's expensive. It takes time. The editing is an absolute nightmare. But the audiobook is so good, and the voice actors they got are some really interesting voices. So you've got kind of actors that were in 13 going on 30. You've got Benjamin Bratt in there. You've got Jennifer Beals in there. Some very interesting voices. They all sound a bit older than the characters are, but the point of it is that the actors are narrating it as characters who are in their 60s now, looking back. So actually the fact that they are older voices works. It's Netflix for the ears, and I really love it. It's one, I would say actually it's probably my all-time favourite audiobook production ever, which is high praise from me because I'm an audiobook first listener.
Yeah, I agree. It was picked up by Apple as one of the best audiobooks of the year.
I was interested to find out that Daisy Jones was the first book by Taylor Jenkins Reid that was published in the UK. So I thought that had been The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Yeah,
but it
I
wasn't.
thought so too.
No, it wasn't. Daisy Jones was the first one. So she actually had written 5 books prior to Daisy Jones. They were romances. They're not necessarily straightforward. I mean, One True Loves, which has been adapted by Amazon as well, it's her only other TV or film adaptation, is all about kind of a woman who's in love and is married, and her husband dies, in parentheses, and she falls in love with another man, only for it to turn out her husband's been stranded on a desert island for the last however many years. So she's now like, oh, bigamy, great. Or polyamory,
wow.
great. So I haven't actually read that one or seen the film adaptation.
That sounds great.
It sounds interesting, doesn't it? But that was kind of what she did beforehand, with these slightly more contemporary romances with an interesting plot line, or with an interesting plot twist, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Evelyn Hugo was a step away from that. That was the first historical novel, and it was that kind of golden age glamorizing the film industry and being a woman in the film industry, and kind of taking on characters outside of her race and gender as well, because obviously you've got 7 husbands, you've got the 7 men. Evelyn Hugo was, I believe, Latina, and it was a completely different, it was a sidestep for what she was writing prior to that.
I think Reese Witherspoon picked it for her book club, but also I think had a hand in the production of the TV series.
Yeah, it was her production company, Hello Sunshine, with Amazon Studios, that produced the TV show, which came out in 2023. So the TV show was delayed because of COVID. So if it wasn't actually for BookTok, I don't actually know if Taylor Jenkins Reid or Daisy Jones would have been as successful as it has been, because there was such a massive gap between this kind of preempt, big news, big exciting book by Reese Witherspoon being produced by Amazon, etc., because that didn't come out for ages. I remember hearing about it and then not hearing anything or seeing anything.
Or it became a BookTok hit. Was it a bestseller or was it a big seller?
It wasn't a big seller. I think like most of her books prior to kind of the pandemic, it was a modest seller. It was okay. I mean, she had 5 books, which suggests that her publisher was happy with her sales. But I think on its launch week in the US, it sold 1,300 copies, which in comparison to the likes of kind of Carrie Soto and Malibu Rising, I think Malibu Rising sold 26,000 on its launch week, and then Carrie Soto sold 36,000. Wow. So, or quite a large jump in between. So with Atmosphere, which is her next book, which comes out in June, I suspect that's going to have an even bigger launch, because she is now what I'd class as an event publication. People are excited by what she's going to write next.
So we've reached that point in the episode where we decide what we're going to do with our copy of the book. Are we going to shelf it, keep it, share it, pass it on to someone else, or shred it? You know, maybe burn it, throw it out the window, who knows? So Ellie, what are you going to do with your copy of Daisy Jones? Are you going to shelf it, or are you going to revisit the audiobook?
Oh, I'm shelving it, completely shelving it. I'm keeping hold of this proof copy. This is gold dust. But also I'm keeping the audiobook. I listen to it every night. Well, I say every night. I listen to it in the summer in particular when I'm trying to go to sleep. It's kind of my go-to nighttime reading. I love it.
I don't own a physical copy of it. I read this on ebook. But this was my second time reading it, and I really enjoyed it, but I think my next, engagement with it, I don't know if I'd necessarily be reading it. I think I would maybe be moving on to, watching the TV show. So if I did have a copy, I'd probably pass it on to someone else. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of Why You're Reading. Be sure to follow us on socials, rate us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple if you're so inclined, and don't forget to tell us your opinions on Daisy Jones and the Six. Do you have it on your shelf? Would you share it? Are you tempted to ask someone for it? Do you have it and you're shredding it? Please let us know, and we will see you in our next episode. Bye!
Bye!